Hey, yo, what is up, everybody? Coach Chad here, the CEO of the Next Level Coaching Academy and your host for the Fit CEO podcast by Chad Molyneux. I hope you guys are doing fantastic. As you guys know, because you guys probably know me pretty well by now, we just dive right in. We just dive right in. And I do it because I value your time. I value my time. I know you just want the information. I know you don't want to hear me just bullshit around. So let's freaking get it. What we're going to be talking about today is I'm actually going to be working through a challenge that we have in NLCA. And this is going to be a little higher level. So this is well, I don't want to say it's only for people that have a team, but this will mostly be for people that have a team. If you don't have a team, I would still listen because you're going to get a lot of information for when you do eventually have a team. Okay. So I'm going to work through a challenge, and this is a lead generation challenge. The reason I chose this one is because lead generation seems to always be a challenge for people. Now, to give you a little bit of context, our main lead generation source is DM outreach. We have 5 DMers on staff, and most of our calls, I'd say about 80% of our calls, come from some form of DM outreach, right? The other percentage of our calls come from ads and also intake forms. Intake forms meaning people go into our quote unquote link in the bio, fill out the link in the bio, apply, and we book them for a call, right? But large majority is from DM outreach. And if you haven't listened to our lead generation podcast yet, where I literally break down how the 6 ways of generating leads and how to stack them. So how not to start with every single possible way of lead generation, but how to start with one and how to stack them over time. I highly recommend that you go to that podcast. Let me get the episode number for you. So sorry, I will go on a little ramble just because I think that this episode ties perfectly with the episode that I am referring to. Give me 1 second. I'm on Apple iTunes. I apologize. Bear with me. Stay with me. Come on now. All right, cool. So it's from March 1st. It's episode 7. It's titled, If You Want More Leads, Listen to This. It's 23 minutes long. It's probably one of the more valuable podcasts that I've done. I literally go through all the ways of generating leads and how you should focus on one and add one at certain stages of your business. Okay. So anyways, with all that said, what we're going to do is I'm going to work out some math with you guys. It's going to be fun math. Don't worry. I'm going to work out some math with you guys on how I work through challenges in my own company. All right. So our goal is to book 300 calls a month. The most amount of calls that we've ever booked in a month is 252. On average, we're somewhere between 200 and 252 calls booked on a monthly basis, but we've never hit that 300 marker. Okay. And I really, really want that 300 marker. Now, what this podcast is going to do is going to teach you the math to figure out what you need to do in order to hit 300 calls booked, right? Because a lot of people, what they do is like, oh, I'll just post more and man, I'll just spend more on ads and I hope we get 300, but hoping is emotional, right? In business, the people that succeed in business, they're the most logical people. Okay. So here's the math. So 300 calls is the target, right? And as I said before, we have 5 DMers on our team. Okay. Those 5 DMers work a total of about 130 hours a week, right? So 130 divided by 5 means that each DMer on average is working about 26 hours a week. Okay. From there, we know the team's collective call booking per hour. Okay. What that means, call booking per hour, means that how many calls on average will the team book within an hour. So how do you figure out call booking per hour? Okay. What you do is you'll take the total amount of calls that are booked within the month. Let's say it's 250, and you'll do division to figure out this number. So let's say that your DM team worked 500 hours and they booked 250 calls within that month. So you'll take the amount of calls, which is 250, and you'll divide it by the amount of hours worked, which is 500, which gives you, in this example, 0.5, which is 0.5 calls booked per hour. So for every hour worked, in this example, the team booked 0.5 calls, right? So once again, that math is total calls booked within the month or the week if you're trying to figure out the weekly call booking per hour, and you divide it by the amount of calls that were actually booked. All right. So the data for us is that our DM team on average books about 0.4 calls per hour. So 0.4 is the call booking per hour number, right? So what that means for us is that on average, if we're working 130 hours a week and we multiply that by 0.5, 130 times, 0.4, that means that on average, we're booking about 52 calls a week, right? So what we do there to figure out how many calls on average we book per month is you divide that by 7, because there's 7 days in a week. That will give you your daily average. Our daily average is 7.4 calls. And we multiplied that by, let's say there's 31 days in the month. And that means that on average, we're booking about 230 calls a month. Okay. So we're about 70 calls off from that 300 number. All right. So bear with me. All right. What we've gone through so far is we figured out how many hours our DMers are working a week. We figured out what their call booking per hour is. We figured out the average per month by multiplying 130 times 0.4, which gives us our weekly target, right? From there, you divide it by 7 because there's 7 days in a week. That gives you your daily target. You multiply that by how many days are in the month, which is either 30 or 31. And if it's February, it's 28, right? Pretty simple. So that'll give you the average call booking per month. All right. So that means we have 3 options if we want to hit the 300 number. All right. So this is how you figure out the solution. Man, all right, we're 70 calls off. How can we get those 70 calls? So option number 1 is you add more hours, meaning you hire another DMer. So option number 1 is we can hire a 6th DMer and have that individual work 40 hours, right? Because then our 130 hours per week, 130 plus 40 means that we're now at 170. And if our call booking per hour stayed the same at 0.4, we multiply 170 by 0.4, we get 68 calls on average per week, divided that by 7 days in the week. That gives us a 9.71 call booking per day average. There's 31 days in the month. That means that we're at 301 calls for the month. So that's option number 1. We can just add another person, right? Option number 2 is we don't add another person, but we increase the call booking per hour. So we get more efficient per hour, right? So what would have to happen there? Let's say we increased our call booking per hour from 0.4 to 0.55. All right. So now what we do is we take the 130 hours on average worked per week, multiply that by 0.55. We get 71.5 calls booked per week on average. Divide that by 7 because there's 7 days in a week, means that we get about 10.2 calls a day. Multiply that by 31. And that means that we get about 316 calls a month. All right. So that's option number 2. Instead of adding more people, we make them more skilled and we increase their call booking per hour from 0.4 to 0.55. Okay. Now, option number 3 is we add a different acquisition channel, right? So maybe we get to the point where like, man, we don't want a 6th DMer. We just feel like that's a lot to manage. We just need to add a different way of getting leads. So an example that we can use, a real life example that we can use in our business is advertising. So we spend about $20,000 a month on advertising right now. We used to spend about $10,000 a month. Okay. And looking at our data, $10,000 a month would get us about 52 calls booked, right? And if we, on average, organically, without ads, are booking 230 calls, right? 230, let's do some more math, plus 52 means that that would get us to about 282 if we spend $10,000 and get 52 calls booked in advertising, right? Which means there are about 18 calls off, right? So in theory, let's do some math. If 10,000 gets us 52, 52 divided by 10,000 means, hold on, I got to figure out this math. Okay, so I figured out the math. So what that means is that for every $5,000 that we spend, we book 26 calls, right? So let's say theoretically we spent 15,000. That means that we would get about 78 calls if we spent $15,000 a month, right? So if we book 230 calls from DM Outreach and we book an additional 52 calls from $10,000 of ad spend, if we bump our ad spend from $10,000 to $15,000, that means that our call bookings would go up to 78. So then we do 78 plus 230, and that gets us to 308 calls. So those are the different options. The different options are you either add a DMer, you either increase the call booking per hour, or you increase your ad spend and or add another acquisition channel. So now let's work backwards from here. What's going to be the most cost-effective and the most efficient idea, right? So if a DMer cost you about $10 an hour and you needed to have them work 40 hours a week in order to hit that number, so then 10 times 40 equals 400 times 4 means that you're going to spend an additional $1,600 a month if you choose to go that route. All right, let's bop on down to ads. I just did out the math. If we went from $10,000 a month spend to $15,000 a month spend, that means that you would have to spend an additional $5,000 a month just to get an additional, what is that, 28 more calls to get us to the 308 total, right? So to me, I can X that one out right away because that one just doesn't seem very feasible to me, right? I'm going to spend $5,000 just to get an additional couple extra calls opposed to spending $1,600 to hit the same target. Doesn't make sense to me. Okay. Now, this other one, number 2, which is, I don't have to spend any more money. So the number would be 0. All I would have to do is invest more time into making that department more skilled, right? So here's probably what I would do. I would probably spend another month focusing on increasing the call booking per hour by providing additional training, by providing more opportunity for leads. Maybe we do some more things organically. And if it's just absolutely cannot budge, cannot get the call booking per hour, I would bring on another DMer and know, okay, cool, now we're going to be good, right? So that's the way that I personally would work through this individual challenge. So I know this was a ton of math, but when you're super high level, this is what you need to do in order to figure out where you want to go. And if you're beginner in this and you're listening to this podcast, you're like, holy fuck, this is way over my head. This is way overwhelming. Here's what I want you to understand. And this could be your most simple takeaway. Business decisions need to be logical. They need to be with numbers. And yes, at times they need to be emotional when people are involved. But more times than not, like I would say, 9 out of 10 times, you're making a decision because the numbers make sense, not because you emotionally feel like one way is better than the other. Because whenever you get wrapped up in emotion, you more likely make the wrong decision opposed to making a decision based off of cold hard facts or math or numbers. Okay. So that's your big takeaway. If you're a beginner, if you're somebody who's more advanced and you have a team, these are things that we teach in the Next Level Coaching Academy Mastery Program on how to work through this math in order to figure out how to get from A to B. So hopefully you guys found this helpful. If you did, let me know. Take a screenshot, post it on your story. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and we will chat in the next one.